The listening section is divided into two separate timed parts. You will hear each conversation or lecture only one time. After each conversation or lecture, you will answer some questions about it. The questions typically ask about the main idea and supporting details. Some questions ask about a speaker's purpose or attitude. Answer the questions based on what is stated or implied by the speakers. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Your notes will not be scored. In this part, you will listen to one conversation and two lectures. You must answer each question. Remember that you cannot return to previous questions. You will now begin this part of the listening section.
Listen to a conversation between a student and the professor of her theater class.
So, Professor Baker, about our next assignment you talked about in class.
Yes, this time you'll be in groups of 3. Each of you will have a chance to direct the other 2 in a short scene from a play you've chosen yourself.
Right. And, well, I've been reading about story theater and...
Story theater? Tell me about what you've read.
Well, it's a form of theater where folk or fairy tales are acted out. It was introduced by the director Paul Sills in the 1960s. In Sills's approach, an actor both narrates and acts out a tale. So, like someone will appear on stage, and then they'll start narrating a tale about, say, a king. And then the same person will immediately switch to and start acting out the role of the king, with no props or scenery.
Sills. You know, I actually saw his first story theater production in 1968. He did the fairy tale The Blue Light.
Really? So whatever gave him the idea to produce that?
Well, as you know, back in the late 1960s, lots of people in the United States were disillusioned with the government. Sills was grappling with how to produce theater that was relevant in such times. Then he happened to read The Blue Light, and he realized it had just the message he wanted. See, in the story, a man who's lost all hope as a result of the unfortunate events in his life completely turns his life around with the help of a magical blue light. So, the blue light in the story symbolizes a way out of seemingly unsolvable human problems. And for Sills, that light symbolized an answer to the political turmoil in the U.S.
But weren't you, audiences bothered that the actors were performing on a bare stage?
Well, story theater is a departure from traditional dramatic theater with its realistic, elaborate props and scenery. But Sills could make us see, say, a big tall mountain through the facial expressions and body movements of the actors and their telling of the story. We were all swept up, energized by such an innovative approach to theater, even if one or two of the critics weren't as enthusiastic.
Cool. So, anyway, what I really wanted to ask, I'd love to try doing story theater for my project, instead of just a scene from a traditional play.
That's possible. A short tale can be about the same length as a single scene. Which fairy tale would you do?
Actually, I was reading about another director of story theater, Rex Stevenson. You know, he produces plays based on folk tales as well. Maybe I could direct one of those.
Okay, yes, Rex Stevenson. Now, Stevenson's style of story theater is a little different from Sills's. He'll use simple props. A chair will represent a mountain, but the significant difference is with the narrator. The narrator will play only that role. Let's talk about
Listen to part of a lecture in a marine biology class.
And the sea is teeming with tiny organisms, but they don't get as much popular attention as, say, whales. Microscopic algae just aren't as exciting, I suppose. And yet those organisms are the foundation of the bulk of the marine food chain. Without plankton, which is the global term for these tiny organisms, there would be no whales. Plankton is found both in freshwater and marine environments. Again, it's a term we use for any small organisms that float along with the current, either because they're too small or weak to swim against it, or because they don't have any capacity at all to move by themselves. Plants and plant-like plankton are called phytoplankton, while animals and animal-like plankton are called zooplankton. For over a century now, researchers have been trying to solve a mystery about zooplankton. You see, some species of zooplankton migrate, or not the way birds do when the seasons change, but daily in a phenomenon we call DL vertical migration, or DVM. In their DL vertical migration, zooplankton swim up near the surface of the water during the night and swim down to deeper water during the day. Depending on the species and region, this can be a round trip of between 100 and 400 meters. For a tiny microscopic organism, that's a huge distance. Remember now, zooplankton can't swim very well, and DVM requires a lot of energy. So there must be an important benefit to this daily up and down commuting. We're not exactly sure what this benefit is, though there are several compelling theories. I'll talk about them in a moment, but first I want to talk about what we do know, or rather what we're pretty sure we know. So researchers generally agree that the stimulus for zooplankton DVM is light. Zooplankton tend to swim away from sunlight into deeper water where the sun's rays barely penetrate. At night, when the sun no longer illuminates shallower water, zooplankton head back toward the surface. Now, why would light cause zooplankton to expend all that energy and migrate? One popular theory is that zooplankton are hiding during the day from visual predators, those animals that hunt by sight. The darkness provides safety during the day. Then at night, after migrating upward, they have an opportunity to feed on phytoplankton that float at the surface. Makes sense, doesn't it? But what do we do with the data showing that many kinds of zooplankton don't dive deep enough during the day to become invisible to predators? Or that others dive deeper than is necessary to escape hunters' eyes? And that some zooplankton are bioluminescent, which means they have special organs that light up and make them visible even at great depths. Well, despite all this, we believe predator avoidance is a possible explanation because of studies done in freshwater lakes. It turns out there's a correlation between the presence or absence of vertical migration and the presence or absence of fish that find their prey by sight. But what are some other possible explanations? Some researchers suggest that zooplankton migrate to avoid the sun's ultraviolet light. That would explain why some zooplankton are found at such great depths. Visible light may not penetrate very far down, but ultraviolet light can. And we know that some zooplankton have special pigments that protect them from the damage ultraviolet light can cause. That could be why some zooplankton are able to stay closer to the surface during daylight hours. And there's a third theory. Although it takes a lot of energy for the zooplankton to migrate, they conserve energy while floating in deeper, colder water. So while they're not feeding, they're quietly digesting in cooler water. But remember, zooplankton consist of any number of different organisms, from microscopic worms to crab larvae to tiny fish. And they are found in a large range of marine habitats: cold water, warm water, shallow water, deep water. So there may be different reasons for different species.
Listen to part of a lecture in an archaeology class.
A popular misconception about archaeology. Some people imagine we just go out into the field with a shovel and start digging, hoping to find something significant. Well, while there is an element of luck involved, we have an array of high-tech tools to help us figure out where to concentrate our efforts. One of the newer tools actually relies on particle physics. Talk about interdisciplinary. Here's a machine that brings together two very different sciences. This machine is called a muon detector. Muons are subatomic particles that result from cosmic rays. Okay, let me start over. Cosmic rays aren't actually rays. They're basically protons zipping through outer space at close to light speed. And when they collide with the atoms in Earth's atmosphere, they break up into smaller particles, muons. Now, these muons are still highly energized, so they can easily pass on down to the Earth's surface. In fact, they can pass through solid matter, so they can also penetrate deep into the surface. And it's this property of muons that archaeologists are taking advantage of. Let me explain. With the right kind of equipment, scientists can use muons to create a kind of picture of the structures they're studying. Let's say we're studying a Mayan pyramid in Central America, and we're interested in finding out if there are burial chambers or other rooms inside. Well, a muon detector will show a greater number of muons passing through the less dense areas inside the pyramid. Yes, Andrew?
I'm not sure I get how this muon detector works exactly.
Well, muons lose energy as they pass through dense material, like the stone walls of the Mayan pyramid. So more muons and more energetic muons will be passing through empty spaces. The muon detector can differentiate the areas where more muons are passing through, the empty spaces, as well as where there are fewer muons, the walls and dense areas. These empty spaces will show up as darker, so we wind up with a kind of picture of the pyramid and its internal structure.
A picture?
Sort of like an X-ray image.
Okay, so if we see darker areas inside the pyramid, we assume it's an empty space with more muons.
Exactly. With this technology, we can see what's inside a structure before we dig, so we know exactly where to explore and we can minimize the damage excavation can cause. Even a little damage could result in our losing vital information forever. Now, muon detectors have been around for some time, but they've been improved upon since archaeologists started using them. In 1967, a physicist placed a muon detector beneath the base of one of the Egyptian pyramids at Giza, and he was looking for burial chambers. Now, it happened that the muon detector found none, but he did demonstrate that the technique worked. Unfortunately, the machine he used was so big that many archaeologists doubted muon detection could be practical. How could they get a massive piece of equipment into, say, the jungles of Belize? Then there was the issue of range. The machine used in 1967 could only scan for muons directly above it, not from the sides. So it actually had to be put underneath the pyramid so it could look up. That meant if you wanted to find out what was inside an ancient structure, you'd first have to bury the detector beneath it. There's been a lot of work on these machines since then, and these problems have been solved by and large. That's not to say that technology is perfect.
This part is identical to the first one. You will listen to one conversation and 2 lectures. You must answer each question. Remember that you cannot return to previous questions. You will now begin this part of the listening section.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an employee in the university's historical library.
Morning. What can I help you find?
Well, I saw on the internet that the university library has menus and things from local restaurants, like the Springfield Eatery.
Right. A lot of local businesses have donated materials to our collection, including that restaurant. I'm pretty sure we have 10 or 15 boxes of materials from there.
Good. I thought you were located in the main library, so I went there first and they sent me here. I hadn't realized the university had a separate historical library. I think what you're doing is great, collecting local documents and photos, keeping a record of the region.
I'm glad you see the value in it. We've been collecting materials for going on 70 years now. Last year, we had an exhibition that showcased how the town square has changed over the past 50 years. So that got the word out a little, but you're right. A lot of students don't know we exist. Well, unless they're majoring in history. So you're looking for something for a class?
Not exactly. My grandmother went to this university, and while she was here, she worked as a waitress.
At the Springfield Eatery.
Yes, and that's where she met my grandfather. So they're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, and I noticed online that you have old menus from some of the restaurants. I was thinking I could find one from the year they met and frame a copy for them.
What a unique idea. What year are you looking for?
1954.
I know we have a few menus from the 1950s, but you'll have to check. There are some gaps. Some years we didn't receive any new materials, and sometimes restaurants go a while without changing their menus.
Oh no, I really wanted to give them something special.
Well, how about this? We also have a lot of photos, so maybe you could find one of your grandmother, or maybe even one with both of your grandparents.
That'd be awesome.
Well, the only thing is most of our materials are still in boxes. No one's ever taken the time to organize them. So it might require a fair amount of sifting.
I have a couple of tests coming up, but I can take a quick look, if that's okay. I know some libraries have special rules for handling delicate or old materials.
Well, these aren't particularly old. Just the
Listen to part of a lecture in a theater history class.
One of the things New York City is known for is its Broadway theaters. Big productions, elaborate musicals. A lot of money goes into producing a musical, with the actors, costumes, scenery, and so on. The shows are designed to appeal to large audiences, to make the production financially viable. But theater didn't always appeal to the masses. In the middle of the 19th century, it was mostly wealthy residents who were going to Broadway. They would see an opera that was probably written and produced in Europe before making its way over to New York. It was a scene for, well, the socially prominent, the upper class, who attended these functions, perhaps because they felt obligated rather than because of a genuine interest in theater. But in the 1860s, something else started to occur. The middle-class population began to grow, and they were looking for a source of entertainment. Keep that in mind while I talk about a theater owner named William Wheatley. In 1866, William Wheatley had this show, and it was different from most shows on Broadway at the time because it wasn't an opera. And it was developed right here in the United States, in English, unlike the operas, which were typically in Italian or French. Wheatley also decided to incorporate some fancy production techniques, stage effects. The show also included music to make it more entertaining. And, through a stroke of luck, a world-renowned ballet troupe became available just as Wheatley's show was about to open, so he didn't hesitate to include the ballet dancers in his production. Along the lines of those special effects I mentioned, Wheatley redesigned the entire stage for this show. Every floorboard on the stage could be lifted up or pushed down. They were all movable. This allowed for trapdoors to be placed anywhere on the stage, so pieces of the set, of the scenery, could easily be stored beneath the stage. And these trapdoors also gave performers another, less traditional way to enter and exit the stage. While today we might not think much of it, things like this are standard nowadays, the concept was quite novel at the time of Wheatley's show, and was one of the things that made the show a hit with audiences. Another innovative element in the show was a scene called the transformation scene. During this scene, the audience watched in amazement as the setting on stage changed from a moonlit cave to a throne room in a palace. Normally, to have this type of major scene change, the curtains would close, the stage crew would remove the previous set and replace it with the new one, and then the curtains would open again. In this instance, though, the transformation took place in front of the audience using simple machinery. And this effect left a lasting impression on everyone who saw Wheatley's production. In fact, those people were probably disappointed when they saw another show that didn't contain something as, well, as elaborate or exciting. So look, when it premiered, Wheatley's show took audiences by surprise. It appealed to large crowds, including the growing middle class. The show ran for almost 2 years straight in New York City, an achievement unheard of at a time when productions typically lasted weeks or months, not years. It also went on tour, visiting different cities across the United States for over 25 years. So, the show was quite a success. And with all that in mind, some people call Wheatley's show the first musical on Broadway. Now, our current definition of a musical is that it tells a story through dialogue and song. In Wheatley's show, the musical sections, well, they didn't necessarily integrate well with the story, giving an overall impression of something more like a variety show. Yes, everything was loosely focused around a central theme, so maybe it's fair to say then that the show gave audiences a hint of a new form of musical theater that would ultimately appear on Broadway in the decades to follow.